this new initiative that I and two friends of mine have co-founded called the Future Navigators. And it's a concept more or less about a role. Anyone can be a future navigator. And that's kind of a skill we try to train in organizations, cities, and regions that we have worked with for different years. And we came together in San Francisco 2 years ago and found out that we have pretty much done the same thing, all three of us, but in completely different places. But we have overlapping networks, which becomes very large, and I would say very interesting network in the front line of societal innovation from different parts of the world, which we involve always from day one in our project's work. And that's what we call crowdsourcing, or making things open source. And it's about attractiveness in the 21st century global economy. Now, what is that about? Well, it's about the future. And I mean, you could ask these questions. How often do you hear them? Where do you like to live? We see many places here. How would you like to work? And how would you like to learn? What do you need to learn? And when do you need to learn in a world of change where we perhaps need many different stages of learning all our life, lifelong learning? And the thing here is I mean, I feel very happy here in Romania. Maybe I want to live here, you know, and work here. Who knows, you know? I work a little bit as a digital nomad and traveling around a lot, do my business intelligence, and together with my friends. We call it tacit-to-tacit knowledge. You have to share the experience together when it's happening in the certain place you visit. And it's certain knowledge you cannot make explicit or transfer in other media. So we have to travel around different places and meet and co-create the future together. And I mean, imagine a world where we all could share some same basic conditions to develop our full human potential. That kind of world is it's like it's happening already now in certain places. I mean, certain places have come far ahead others when it comes to developing some kind of welfare society and technology and economic growth. The problem, though, is that if those more privileged places do not democratize and disseminate and share their expertise and progress when it comes to these sustainable mechanism to create attractive and prospering places, then it will hit back on us in terms of politics and negative feelings in a large group of populations who are in this. We see it already happening a lot right now in the world politics. There is a divide between those who are on the train to the future and those who are not. A divide between connected globalists and disconnecting localists, and a divide, what I would say, between Team Future and Team Past. And that's something we need to deal with because, I mean, but anyway, this narrative, this larger narrative of human evolution based on these milestones of technological and cultural progress is, however, irreversible. There is no turning back, so to speak. And I will show you some examples of current changes that are defining for the 21st century democracy and economy. And I would like to quote there William Gibson from his interview in The Economist, the magazine in 2003. He said, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." And that's good for us in our work, because it means that we can actually travel to certain places and meet with certain people who works with a higher purpose, like, for example, Grazian, and interesting projects and intangible or tangible products coming out from that, where we can see And I would emphasize especially about from the younger generations, because they are basically the future, and they are forming their future of work and society and their future economy right now. So when you study the pre and post millennials, you can get a pretty good idea how we need to navigate the unknown and facilitate their life when it comes to city planning or work life, and how we can work strategically to facilitate the young people, because they are already working out things that we can see patterns. It's like if you're an experienced sailor, after a while you can navigate the unknown because you see certain patterns and signals which guides you, and that's what we do. So what is then navigation in a world in motion? I talked about the sailor here. It's like, I mean, we talk about being an entrepreneur, creating a startup, beginning somewhere. And it follows this classical model from Everett Rogers, the S-curve, or the diffusion of innovation follows an S-curve. And navigation happens here. It's some kind of leadership by creative initiative. And it's about emergent practice. It's very different from when you have sort of come along the way of built up resources. That's where you have something to administrate and manage, and certain things becomes even more clear as a pattern, and you have done things before, so you can pretty much have a manual and look up how you solve certain situations or problems. So there can be a best practice, but there cannot be a best practice when we deal with innovation, because it always happens on the fringe. And that's where we say you cannot manage, you can only navigate. Now the thing is, if we stop navigating along the way here, as certain ventures become after a while more institutionalized and bigger and bureaucratized, and get the best practice people in place, and there's a norm and conformity and certain rules and policies in place, I mean, you will go bankrupt if you lose the skill of navigation. Because the world is moving, even if our ventures are not moving anymore. And that's why you have to start a new cycle of innovation, of course. And that comes with a strategic approach, because being strategic is being proactive and being visionary. And you cannot only be visionary, you also have to be artistic, because you have to formulate and communicate that vision and get people on board on this new project. And you better do it before you enter the decline phase, where there's a much more of a problem to gain momentum in such a new wave. So before this, it's called the inflection point, where plus becomes minus in the middle there. You have to start earlier to gain momentum and ride on that wave of progress. And that's also about navigation. And that's why you often have the changemakers and the mavericks, who are a bit weird, but if you tap into what they see when they are out in their field work, scanning the periphery, you get an idea how you can serve the waves of change in innovation and make progress in this world in motion. So it's of course about people, but we also put, I would say, technology in the center, and we do this business intelligence globally and bring it to the local place analysis with the organizations and cities and regions that we work with to start to work out these mechanisms in the workplace or in the city urban environment that attracts the new workforce and economy. And it's very much about technological development, because humans develop technology to be able to deal with complexity, I would say. I mean, complexity is what we call nature. It's a complex adaptive system. And so we try to reduce complexity by technology. And we make this technological progress. I mean, from wood and steel to bits and atoms, we can have stuff like this. And it gives opportunity to create new business models, managing a great deal of complexity in the world of platform economics compared to the traditional value chain of production to the end consumer. And that we had the computer power to manage that greater complexity today when it comes to these business models where users create value for other users on a platform. And the same goes for organizations, where we now can work much more with business agility and in organizations with dynamic leadership and more like network-like organizations instead of top-down hierarchies, where we more or less tried to, before we had this technological maturity, we tried to simulate and be machine-like, but now we have a machine who can do it. So we can work much more agile in this sense. And we see that approach during the last 30 years evolving now in the new business. And of course, also we have a shift when it comes to needed skills from body workers who are now becoming automated and robotized and declining as a workforce. We come to this knowledge economy with knowledge workers, and we have also recently a shift from STEM to become STEAM, which I will talk a little bit more about. Then we have some kind of new social contract here also, that the younger generation prefer to work more in the kind of gig economy, and freelancers and entrepreneurs in business networks. They want to be flexible and find their path of development. They are not that loyal, to stay all their life in the same organization where there are scarce resources at the top and everybody's sort of competing for those scarce resources in terms of contracts and titles and pay and everything. So there's a new sort of more community-oriented and co-creation type of work coming along here. And also we have great mobility, of course, today, where I've talked a little bit about these from locals and being somewhere at a certain place, have never looked across the other side of the hill, and to these globals and anywheres, the nomadic workforce, who like to travel and see new things and meet new friends. And all these things together, what we designs us back. So it somehow affects our mindset in our formative years. What kind of new stories and cultures do we share? And I would say the millennials are the first global generation in that sense, where all kids in the world share through YouTube and other media the same kind of stories now. And that shapes their preferences, new behaviors, which are quite different from what shaped or in the formative years when the traditionalists or the baby boomers born in the 40s were young. So they have completely different preferences about their life and work and how that goes together with a higher purpose. It's called the purpose-driven generation. And you see them here. There's a little illustration with my two kids. We are at DreamHack, the world's largest LAN party, or you can say digital fest in Sweden. It's about 30,000 kids every year. So it's summer and winter. And I picked some statistics here produced by Google and Ipsos in a study where they asked, what kind of device do you use on a daily basis? And you see Generation Y are the pre-millennials, so they are born in the 80s and 90s, and Generation Z, that they come after the millennium shift, and they are teenagers and becoming early adulthood now. And it's important to study this because where did you learn to think? Well, that's very much what you interact with as a learning environment. And gaming, for example, you see game consoles are much more used as a device among Generation Z. They are the gaming generation, while Generation Y are more the Netflix generation. But the interesting thing with gaming, it's an interactive story. It's an interactive movie. And it takes place as some kind of form of subliminal learning. You don't understand that you learn things while having fun. And it's not only like running around shooting people, like parents always say, I need to keep my kids away from those games. And there are, of course, age restrictions and stuff, but kids doesn't care. It was the same when we rented videos and stuff, the Chainsaw Massacre, and when the parents were away. So FPS here is for first-person shooter. That's a kind of game which is pretty violent, often CS:GO. But what you learn there is actually like what you learn in the book by Sun Tzu from over 2,000 years ago. He wrote The Art of War, where you learn strategy, tactics, and operations, which are very useful type of knowledge in project management and politics. And you train your reflexes, you train problem solving as teams online, logged into the same environment when competing in those environments. So it's problem solving in real time. So I find this very interesting. You talked also about being a family, a community. We really like that kind of approach when it comes to eventifying the city, as we call it, because there is this authority on urban transformation, Charles Ledger, he coined this with City 1.0 and City 2.0 and City 3.0, where City 1.0, I mean, urban areas emerged because it was a marketplace, and it's also a place for production and trade. But it became very much during the industrialization, cities were factories, more or less, and it transformed a little bit during the last century into cities becoming more of learning places with technology parks and universities and more collaborative environments for learning in the knowledge economy. And then City 3.0, that's a little bit where we are now, where you see a decline in city centers when it comes to boutiques, everything that you can buy through e-commerce. That creates a problem for traditional trade locations in cities. And what is the role of the city then? What shall we use our facilities for? And a good thing is to try out and look at the context of a city and identify and profile it with some kind of starting off from the local context. How could you contribute, for example, to the 17 SDGs as a city and create events like that? And that goes from everything providing facilities for what is really important here when you look at the city as a platform. It's well, yeah, exactly. As a platform economy, if we transfer that, my little improvisation is finding its form back into the material, I realize. So the platform economy, I mean, these kids growing up, they live, breathe, and eat platform economics, which is a business model, basically. And when you look at the city as a platform, then it becomes interesting. How can you, because an important aspect of platform economics is to create frictionless entry. The first entrance has to be free, a $0 entrance, And how can you do experiments? I mean, there are certain things on a national level which does not allow municipals or regions to do whatever they like in terms of social or city planning experiments. But it would be interesting to try a little bit. We see experiments now with basic income, for example. What happens? Can we do some research and see what happens when we don't put the money on controlling people, but rather to facilitate kind of entrepreneurship or whatever for the same amount of money in transitions, perhaps between different work and so on. And what happens if we try a little bit free public transport? How could that affect the increase of interaction and for tourism industry and other things? And there is also an interesting thing in Trondheim, one city that we work with. What I have heard, the politician decided on creating a budget account. Is called the budget for failure. So all the parties have a mandate, because they have agreed basically to have this experimental budget to try out different cutting-edge experiments in the city environment. And perhaps you need to allocate resources into the, always come with an account number somewhere so you can sort of defend, okay, we made 9 failures, but without doing them we wouldn't done the success in the 10th experiment, because innovation works like that. And as I told you, this generation will have a completely different idea of how they want to collaborate and work at different places. as creative environments. So what we see, for example, where I work now in the European Commission, we talk a lot about the polarization in Europe when it comes to the job market due to the impact of digital transformation on labor markets. And we see here jobs ranked by their low wage class and middle income class, and then you have the higher wages in the right part of the diagram. And then you have a percentage in change between 1993 to 2006. You see a decline here. So it's not like it has that interesting shape. So when it comes to the service sector, for example, it's and I see it actually where I live in my city. We have lost many stores and boutiques and stuff due to e-commerce, but we get more and more hairdressers. I mean, you can't cut your hair online, or massage, or therapy, or yoga, or culture, or jazz clubs, or live music, or electronica clubs, or events, places for socializing. And as I say, create places also to facilitate spontaneous meetups. Or for international delegations, you just need a projector and talk around something, Whereas that, do we have to rent a place really to try out those experiments with frictionless entry? So you can be very creative about such things and see what kind of things that will spur. And then you have, of course, knowledge workers on a high level, like business leaders, CEOs, and other things who doesn't seem to decline in the workforce. But of course, robotization has hit hard on engineering and mechanical work and stuff like that. And also when it comes to these office guys and women who manually process information more or less in legislation, law, or accounting, or things like that, which everything which is about information processing, a computer can do much better than us now. But this gives an opportunity, I think, I want to emphasize the A in STEAM here: science, technology, engineering, maths, and the A is for arts. And that's, I think, one aspect today as an urban environment. How can you facilitate the creative class? Because they are the ones who are sort of in this younger generation, shaping the new economy around experience, the city as an experience or as a meeting place, or because you need to see each other away from keyboard and then collaborate worldwide online. And that workforce is, I think, in the coming decades, really on the rise. And it's an important aspect for the others as well, because that's the only I would say, skill here that really defines us as a species compared to other animals on the planet. The other things we can robotize and computerize and so on, but this creative skill, that's in our kind of DNA, and a robot will not have DNA. So to work with this, when we come to different organizations and cities and regions, we have then created a model how we work, and it's a fractal model for a non-linear world in motion, and we call it an open source impact accelerator. Impact meaning societal impact, so we deal with projects, whether it's inventions or larger projects, which has some kind of aspect on societal innovation for human progress. And we do it as an open source thing because we involve our partners and our community even in the development of these models and enterprise and the thing we work with. We do it together. So it looks like this. We have talked about leading with a purpose and to create a good purpose as a city and or as an organization, or to work towards something. And then you deal with eventification, journification, unification, and amplification. And if we start with identification here, we have talked about the importance of group dynamics, and we involved then our international, and that's basically citizens, as you say, how many here are engaged in the co-creation of their societies. And we have these international networks online who participates in all projects we do from day one, which gives both grounding in the project from day one and marketing effects of the project from day one, because people share things where they have worked a little bit, because they like to show others and so on. So it's not like the traditional thing of sitting in a boardroom with locked doors and then come out and top-down implement a new strategy or anything. We involve the world from day one in our work. And we work also with this we call frictionless entry into facilities, facilitation for meetups, for conferences, for technology fests, for whatever, you know. Because what we shape us back. So it's an important aspect of how we design our facilities where we work together, because that affects both our learning and our group dynamics. So then I will skip through this because we are running out of time, but we involve them also to do this purpose-driven narrative of the project. And we can call it city as a service, where we work with projects to appify the city, to make it more easy for people to navigate and the city's offer, because we navigate with these things, especially the younger generations, every day. And also to gamify the city as an online learning environment. I mean, you can gamify, for example, an MBA. You don't have to go to a university. You can gamify it and learn it in an online city together for 40 euro instead of 40,000 euro. But with volume, you sort of tap into the economy of large-scale economy of exponential growth. Then we use these models to map our impact journey in projects. We use both something I've iterated on, which is a place innovation canvas, where you basically use the 9 factors of traditional branding of what is called image and identity, and creating a vision and mission, and what was the positioning, and what's the business value and a business proposal, and so on. So that's the outer journey. But we also work to match the inner journey of the individuals who work in these projects, to find out who they are, to connect to that purpose. Otherwise, it's important to lead with a purpose if you don't connect the inner journey to the outer journey. And then we work very much was basically the research of intellectual capital and intellectual capital management, where you have structured capital. The definition of structured capital, which is like a city or information or the brand or anything that works for you 24 hours a day, even when the people are not there. And the quality of the structured capital prevents or facilitates the human capital, the competence to operate. And the human capital builds up the relational capital of customers and vendors and stakeholders, which eventually leads to some kind of financial capital. So there you can identify in the city environment what assets do we have in terms of different pieces of structured capital, human capital, and relational capital. What should we sort of prioritize in order to create this attractive place? And we design then a project together with our partners, and then we look for funding to work more on a continuous basis with those projects. So that's how our little accelerator work. And thank you for your time.